Hello, everybody. Welcome to this video. So the way that I'm going to start this is how I typically start a lot of videos, and basically that's just how it's going to go down. I don't really have a topic, so I'll just get into some stuff that I've been looking into that I kind of want to explore. So I'll be exploring these topics live. Um, and without further ado, then where ado, I think it means something like from Shakespeare's play Much Ado, and I even have a video called Much Ado, where you're just talking about nothing, right? It's just like um, where it could seem like that sometimes, but it is in fact trying to develop further thinking and develop ideas further, explore them, gain insights, and at the same time also learn new things. See, I do believe that you can learn things with a person who's like asking themselves these questions, right? And I just got a couple of ideas on my mind right now, but I'll get into this main one in a moment, which has to do with violence, aggression, things like that. But um, what I mean by you can explore things and learn things from yourself, I think it's not so much that you learn things that weren't there. They could, in fact, be there. And they could also be like combinations that you didn't know existed, right? Now, with the first thing, I'm talking about review, right? So things that you have seen in the past and that you basically review by associating, by thinking about different things. So if I'm thinking about a cat, then I think about animals, and a cat leads me to think about a dog. But you do this conceptually with like the concepts that you're like investigating or looking into or thinking about. Um, Whenever you get from one association to another in a chain linking way, eventually you'll get to like certain insights, or they'll become like insights, right? And it could be interesting to analyze why they are insights. Maybe they're relevant to something that you're currently facing in your life. But that's more in terms of review. In terms of the second thing that I was mentioning, in terms of different combinations, that's talking about potential ultimately. And I was listening to Jordan Peterson. I think it was the second podcast with Jordan Peterson and Lex Friedman. Um, and I think that this is a known idea too. But I remembered because it has to do with this idea of combining different elements, right, in different ways. But within, Peterson was talking about like within a limited, not rigid, but within with certain rules and structures, right? So he used as an example playing chess, right? And he mentions that chess has like a chessboard, and the moves that can be done in a game, the different types of moves that can be done in a game uh, are a lot, right? Basically, I think there are more moves or more ways to play chess with another person than there are. He was mentioning subatomic particles in the universe or something like that, which is crazy. And that's what I would be talking about potential. Now, for both of those things, see, it's implied that you're not making stuff up, um, which then we can get into the creative element of things and say, well, when you develop something, when you develop a new play in chess, or when you conceptually think of something that hasn't been thought of before, is that creativity, or is that just accidental connection of different things, right, that already are there? So we can get into that at another time. And we could also talk about creativity in terms of like the blank slate idea. I think it was from Locke, right? The tabula rasa, which is the idea that you're like born blank, and then as you develop, all these like social and whatever imprints get put on you. So if you think about it in terms of a person doesn't know anything, and they're just gonna go ahead and talk, and based on what they're saying, they're going to come up with things, right? I would find that very difficult to do. So, what's implied in both of these things, whether in the first idea that I was talking about, reviewing things that maybe you forgot about but are still stored in your memory, or maybe putting things together as you think things through, you start to connect the dots, you start to link different concepts and associate different things, and that's how you create certain things. Both of those things have to do with you previously knowing things, right? So that's why it's important to fill your head with information, with knowledge from books, from videos, from other people, from interactions. So I come like that. I come to you as someone who's studying, who's reading, who's writing, who's talking to other people, who's in constant dialogue with himself, who's, you know, and then this is a moment where I can like do just that, which is to explore, to expand, to review, or to ultimately create or develop new insights and learn new things, right? But it is presupposed that you must have input, right? I mean, can you do it without input? Again, you could, but I think you would be very limited. Now, when you are doing it with input, so if I'm reading, if I'm learning, if I'm talking to people, if I'm listening to videos, whatever, writing, developing ideas, and then I do something like this, then you're going to be using things from, your studies, and ultimately you're going to be yeah, you're going to be reviewing. That's becoming repetitive, I know, but you're going to be reviewing, and then you're going to be potentially creating things. Okay. Well, anyway, now back to this idea, which was about aggression and violence. See, and for this, I just recently made a video where I spoke about how I think it's like not a waste of time, but but learning, educating yourself, reading books, studying is more for stimulation, which, if you think about it, there isn't really a difference between being obsessed with studying and being obsessed with gambling, or being obsessed with alcohol, or being obsessed. See, it's like an addiction. Even making these videos, right? It's a sort of obsession, compulsive obsession. Like, I need to make a video. I need to talk. I need to um, further develop my ideas, whatever that means. I've been having problems with that, with those ideas, such as developing, growing, learning, maturing, making progress. It's like, what does that mean? Like, can you understand that? Okay, I'm getting off topic, but I'll come back to the aggression, violence thing. What does that mean? Because I also want to explore that. Does that mean that you're going to compare yourself to who you were in the past? And you're going to always do that as a point of reference, so then you are able to say, I'm smarter, I know more than before. Well, we run into a lot of problems when we do that. First of all, we have the idea of growing, developing as a capitalist notion, right? The capitalist societies are production societies, right? Mass production societies. So, what we're talking about ultimately, when you say, I want to grow, I want to develop, I want to mature, I want to make progress in my life, whatever, you're basically talking in capitalistic terms. You're speaking of yourself as if you were some company, right? And you need to have better outputs, right? So for that, you need to organize your resources. You need to learn. You need to study. You need to consider your inputs too, right? Like, what am I eating? What am I consuming? What am I watching? What am I reading? Right? Your habits, all that stuff. But okay, then we have the problem of, so you say, and I just thought of this, right? So you're learning, you, let's say you have a like a range that is the range that of things at any given time, right? And you're in like this progress pole or whatever, right? So you're growing, you're developing, you're going further, which for some reason it's up, right? From the bottom to the top. So you're doing this, right? And this is the information that you know that you handle at any given point, right? Obviously there's information from the unconscious, right? That you permanently know, such as mechanisms at your job, or mechanisms, or maybe mechanisms isn't the right word, but habits, right? That you do, or that you do yearly, like maybe if you do your taxes, or if you pay your insurance, or driving can be considered that too, or if you have a certain problem, you need to talk to a certain person, right? Like, let's say maintenance for your car, right? You already know that you go to this place, there are certain things like that that are there. Okay, fine. But there's also a range of like conscious information that you're using during a given moment constantly, right? The problem with the progress idea is that that range is limited, right? So if you're, let's say you're growing, right? You're developing or whatever. So you used to be here, down here, and now you're here. Okay. So you know new information, but the old information is forgotten, right? So as you move up the progress ladder, you're really not taking what you don't need with you, right? So to a certain extent, what I'm getting at is you're never really developing. You're never, even compared to yourself, even compared to who you were yesterday, or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago. You're constantly only one limited like range of information, sort of say, right? So why? Because, as you know, it's kind of like as you put things in a tube, well, the things that are on the other end are going to be expelled, right? They're going to be pushed out. So you put things in and you push things out. And as you put new things in, you push old things out, right? And then those are the things that you forget, right? That's oblivion, basically. So what does that mean? That means that you can't really compare your progress to your past self. Okay, so what's another definition for making progress? Well, you can then think of it as like, I'm not going to use myself as a reference point. I'm going to use other people, right? And I look out into society and I see that there are, let's take a metric like income, right? I see that there are people out there that are poor, right? They live on the street, whatever. They got no money. And then there are people that are. This is just a very like a rough draft way of doing things, right? But or a very low resolution way of doing things. But let's say there are homeless people that have like no money or very little money. Then there are like what do they call them? Like operators. There's people that work at factories or at companies and they do the hard manual labor, carpenters, construction. Well, not carpenters, but like construction workers, people like that, right? They make more money than the people on the street, right? Well, the people on the street or homeless people don't make money, or they make very little money. And then from there, we have another level, which could be, well, bigger income, right? And then those people would be maybe like carpenters, electrician, plumbers, even waiters, waitresses, servers, etc. Then there's like another level, which are people with, I don't know, a college education who are working like management positions, supervisor positions, teachers. And then we have another level, which is like maybe a master's degree or PhD people, which could be also people in charge of other people, right? Like, well, managers would be in charge of other people, but we can think of even like executive level, and then above executive level, like investment level, or I don't know. Anyway, the idea here is that you can have a metric and then say, well, I'm making progress when before before that is like 10 years ago, I was hanging out with people that were making so much money, that were within this range. And now I'm hanging out, or now I'm making money, I'm making more money. So I'm making progress, right? Like financially, or using economy as my metric, right? Where again, you can make that, um not comparison, but you can make that case with any type of metric, like such as romantic effective a metric, right? An effective romantic metric, right? Like before I was lonely, now I have a girlfriend, now we're getting married, now we have a family, now et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So it's like, you're using society you're using society as a reference point, right? What other people are doing. So then you're able to tell yourself like, I'm making progress, right? And I would say fine. I think that's a pretty solid way of analyzing your progress, right? um, the problem with that that I just detected is that that's a social metric. Ultimately, it's a social criterion, right? You're comparing yourself to other people, which is fine. At a social level or at a social scale, you're going to be, um, making progress. Like let's say you get it, that's even the terminology that gets used in the workplace, right? In work settings. So you're getting promoted or you're getting demoted, right? You're ascending or you're descending, right? You're going up or you're going down, right? Okay, fine. But I feel like you could, let me give you this example, right? So you're at the bottom based on the financial metric, based on the money metric, on the economic metric, right? And I was gonna use an example of like corporate, what do they call it? Bamboozle? No, corporate. There's a word when you steal or rob money at a corporate level, right? I think it's called embezzlement, right? You embezzle millions of dollars, or you do dirty tricks. But we can also talk about someone that robs a bank or makes like like they do a heist, they commit a crime to get money, right? Anyway, you get to go up a level or certain levels doing immoral things, right? Very practical, but immoral. Excuse me. Immoral to the point where you can't even, truly enjoy what you have achieved. What I mean by truly enjoy is that you can be cynical as hell, you can be super pragmatic as hell, but let's say a robber, right? Or let's say someone in a company that does something where everybody knows, right? Or the robber where like everybody knows him in town, so now he must leave town, skip town, whatever. So they get to enjoy things to a certain extent, but not really, because it's not like you're being admired or celebrated, right? Like people are basically looking at you like a cheat, right? Like a cheapskate, like a person that did something wrong, right? Because you did. So you could say financially, socially, and in that case, it wouldn't even be socially, but based on the economic metric, you have gone up, right? But based on the moral metric, right, or this other way of analyzing things, ethically or even affectionately, or based on recognition, based even on social recognition, or even based on your own parameters, such as guilt, right, um, feeling bad about what you've done, not being able to truly enjoy it. I mean, I understand there are many people that wouldn't care, but you could. But if you don't care, you're gonna have all those other problems where, and I'm not saying all of the time, there could be exceptions. But then what I'm getting to is that you can make progress in a certain area while you're not making progress in another area. And I guess then it would become important to distinguish and figure out which is the area that you would consider relevant for making progress, right? So in this case, I would tell myself, well, The metric that I want to use is the cognitive metric, right? I want to know things, I want to learn things, and I want to teach things. So for me, it's really, I mean, it's important, but it's not the ultimate metric of, I could probably be making like a lot of money, but if I'm not developing cognitively or mentally, or if I'm not learning new things, I'm not going to feel satisfied, right? I'm not going to feel like I'm making progress, right? Um, where society nowadays, I know capitalist society talks more in terms of, well, you need to um, make progress or go up that, how can we call it? Yeah, up that pole or up that progress ladder financially or economically, right? If you're not doing it economically, who cares if you're learning? Who cares if you're doing the right thing, right? I'm sure, again, that's a very cynical perspective. I get it, very pragmatic, practical, whatever. But I've asked people the question of, would you rather be at a shitty ass job, toxic ass workplace, but making a lot of money, or would you rather be at a place where your coworkers are your friends? I know that's not the objective, but where it's like a healthy working environment, it's nice, people aren't getting exploited, you're not getting asked to do things that aren't in your job title, whatever. Um, but you're not making that much money, right? And more often than not, people will say, yeah, I'll take the job where it's a healthy working environment, even though I'm not making that much money. And even further, the conclusion that I've reached, and I've reached this with some of my students sometimes, is you can take a job where it's a toxic working environment and you're making a lot of money short term, right? It's going to work for you if you're in dire need of money, if you really need the job, right? But long term, it's not sustainable. Long term, you want a job where you can more or less get along with your coworkers, with your boss, right? And even if they don't pay that much, hey, at least it's stable. At least I have a job, right? At least I'm not fighting all the time, and more often than not, I would say this happens once you have the experience, once you have the bad experience of a toxic workplace, because then you're able to say, hey, I know it could be worse, right? Like here, sure, there are things, that have to be dealt with. There's criticism, there's some negative aspect, but it's not as worse as this other place where I was at, no, because just recently I was at a place that was like, what the hell? And I can make that comparison now. So anyway, so for me, going back to this idea cognitively, I think that for me it is important to be able to develop mentally, right? Now, there's a problem with that too, right? So I'm just going to be, I guess, deconstructing, criticizing, and trying to make sense of what the hell making progress, moving ahead, developing, growing, maturing, what all these terms, what all these ideas, what all these concepts, which are basically the same thing, what does that mean, right? So I can tell myself now, okay, so I'm going to develop mentally. I'm at a place where I'm not making that much money, but I'm also not starving, right? I'm getting by. It's fine, whatever, right? I like my job, and and I get to learn. I get to grow. I get to further develop cognitively, which is my main area, my main priority, right? That's where I want to be growing, developing, maturing, whatever. We run into that problem again then of maybe not really developing. Why? Because of the metric thing that I mentioned. As you move along, you're you gain insight, right? You gain experience, you learn things, whatever. But then, excuse me, I also feel like you leave things behind, right? You forget things, or if you practice, how come you stumble, you get nervous, right? Now, I think I'm detecting something in me specifically, and if I'm being honest, it's probably because I'm just starting this other way of teaching, which is teaching Spanish to psychology students specifically, teaching more humanitarian Spanish or in Spanish classes and topics and and concepts. So because I know, and I can't lie to myself, I know that when I started teaching English like 16 years ago, I was 15 years ago, I was maybe not. Oh, and this is the other thing, which is gonna lead exactly to the topic of aggression and violence. So it's perfectly, because that's where we're headed. We're gonna head there. We're gonna get there naturally. But okay, so what happened when I was first learning how to teach English was that I wasn't aware of what I was doing to a certain extent, right? I knew English. I knew my cousin and my family members were telling me to teach English because I knew English. And I knew that it was like kind of comfortable arriving at a workplace and just sitting down and talking to people and explaining grammar and vocabulary in English, things that well, grammar I didn't know. I learned it along the way, but like vocabulary, expressions, things like that, translating, um, it was basically like a piece of cake. Um, Even though I know that, this didactic or pedagogical or actual teaching aspect wasn't given, right? Because I mean, I would say even if you have parents that were teachers, you would have to develop it on your own, right? You would have help, and you would probably have like some notions, right? But I didn't have that, so for me it was like you're gonna learn how to teach from zero, right? And I think English, I was just thinking about that today. Teaching English is very practical. I think is one of the most, besides probably like teaching people how to do carpentry or how to fix a car like in a mechanic school, or how to work with mortars or things like that. I mean, there are other practical, very practical, even more practical than language teaching. Yeah, so that aside, there are other things that are more practical to teach and to learn and to apply. English is practical. So I'm comparing teaching English to teaching all of these other subjects, right, in Spanish, such as like psychology things, philosophy things, um, methodology, right, which would be like scientific methodology, which is taught a lot, humanitarian courses or humanitarian classes, things like that, because that's all theory. In English, for instance, when you teach, you have to get the other person to use the language, right? And that's very practical. So you truly teach, because it's not like, okay, I'm teaching about Freud, psychoanalysis. I'm teaching about motivation, emotion. I'm teaching about educational or learning theories or whatever. And everybody's like, okay, I get it. We do the test and that's it, right? No, over here in English, more often than not, I mean, if it's university, it's the same thing. But there are a lot of courses in English where you have to teach, where you have to get the people, the students, to use the language, right? To actually apply it, to actually speak with you, right? And they don't pass unless they're able to understand you and to use it and to speak and to read and to write. So that's hands on to a certain extent, or mouth on. I don't know. That's like doing things. Um, so there's that aspect to it, which I find which I find helped me to establish my teaching method, which was very, which for me, I focused a lot on conversation and also grammar, right? Structure, which is essential. But yeah, because other people can focus on like vocabulary or pronunciation. For me, pronunciation is not a big deal. I mean, I know some things, but I also don't really like it because it's like, well, everybody has their own way of speaking, whatever. But okay, and yeah, teachers can defer with me on that topic and whatever. Well, anyway, so there's the idea then of you're moving along this path, right? This unknown path of becoming an English teacher. And when you do that, You don't have expectations. So that's a blessing, right? Because if I would have began teaching English by saying to myself, I know English, so this is going to be super easy. And with those, which I call the expectation of difficulty, which is to say, what is your idea on how hard or easy this thing is, right? That's what is your expectation on the level of difficulty of this. Like I said, I was kind of unaware of that. But if you were to ask me, I think if you were to ask me, do you think it's going to be hard for you to teach? I think I would have said, yeah, probably, because I'm not a teacher, right? And that's a blessing. And I'm going to explain why, even though it may seem counterintuitive. People that have an expectation of easiness, that is to say, I'm going to do this and I have an expectation that it's going to be easy because, and again, you can always find reasons for either or, right? Which is also kind of funny. So I could have told myself back then, well, I'm not a teacher, but hey, I know English. So this is a piece of cake. It's going to be easy. And here's the funny thing. So if you tell yourself this is going to be easy because of these reasons, right? As soon as you encounter obstacles, because you're going to encounter obstacles, it's going to be super demotivating and it's going to hit you harder than if you had thought negatively, right? So if like I was saying, I didn't really have an idea on the level of difficulty that teaching English was going to be. But if I would have said, or like I said to myself, well, it's probably hard and I'm going to struggle and everything, and then as soon as the obstacles come, it's like you're prepared for them, right? You're mentally prepared. So you just tell yourself, like, well, hey, I got to take these blows. I got to get up, dust myself up, off, and, keep fighting, keep going, keep learning, keep improving, right? Keep making progress again. So you start to do that. And then, eventually you get to be a good teacher, right? So the topic that I'm going to get into, well, is going to be related to, um well, I already kind of explained it, which is the expectation of difficulty. So the key thing here is that I think what's happening to me now is I'm see this time I was expecting psychology teaching to be a piece of cake. So my expectations really were like, since I study a lot of psychology and philosophy and I really like these topics and I really do want to teach these topics, it's going to be a piece of cake. And the obstacles that I'm now facing, the not limitations, but the reality of the matter is that I find myself week after week having to just fly by through the topics, right? There's like, and that's college, right? It's like maybe in my own time, in my free time, I was able to sit down and read and slowly digest and chew an idea and develop it. And now it's like, next, what's next, like you have, like, this is applied knowledge, which is university. Like this week we're looking at sexuality, next week we're looking at motivation, then we're looking at this, then we're looking at that, and we're looking at different topics across different courses or different classes, right? So it's like I spend a lot of time just building or designing the class, right? So it's like I have, it's like, what activity are we going to do? What are we going to do here? What's the assignment going to be? Then test is coming up, then this, then that, then this activity needs these elements, and these exercises, and how am I going to present it to them, and how are they going to do it, and how am I going to evaluate it, and blah 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 blah. So you spend a lot of time actually planning the stuff, and apart from that, it's like, okay, I don't know what this is, so I have to look it up. I really have to learn it because it has to get taught, right? And it becomes like more of a instrumental motivation, extrinsic motivation. It's like, this has to get done, right? It's no longer I'm doing it because I like to do it, right? It's like, now I have to do it. It's my job, right? Which is fine because I know eventually I'm going to get to the same point as I did with English, where all that information is just going to be in my unconscious, ready to, you know, be ready for it to be used or come out when necessary. Which is, to a certain extent, I feel like, see, a teacher and a student aren't that dissimilar, right? They're they're kind of the same, because a good student and a good teacher have to know, right? And in order for you to know, you have to study a lot, you have to work a lot, you have to review a lot, you have to practice a lot, right? You have to do the hard work, you have to like really put in the hours, right? But as soon as you do, and after so many years have gone by, I mean, I think it's worth it because you have that information there, right? And where a student and a teacher are kind of like dissimilar, or where they are different, would be when a student is done, his or her 4 years in college or whatever, and they're off to the workplace. More often than not, they probably, and especially after working for so many years, they probably stop studying, right? And they just have a way of doing things. Fine. But a teacher has to, if they're not constantly updating themselves, learning new things, which is fine. They can also, they're working, they may have a way of doing things, that's fine. You still review the topics and the things that students are going to be reviewing, right? And that's a benefit, because that, after 4 years of, having the same types of classes, you know as much as students, right? Now, after 10 years, you really know your stuff. 15, 20 years, right? You're really going to know your stuff. That's why you have like old professors where, they have gray hair, whatever, 60, 70 years old, 80 even, and they're still teaching because they just have all that massive amount of information in their heads, where you can literally, they're like a walking encyclopedia, a walking Google. Just ask them like, hey, what's this? Or how come this is like this? Or what's the limitations of this concept? What are the disadvantages? What are the criticisms of this? What's a fun fact about this author or this idea? Or what's something I don't know about this? Or, and they're probably able to tell you, right? Because they've studied the things so much, which again is kind of like repetition, that they're just able to tell you that stuff. So I think that would be the goal, right? Now, this expectation of difficulty would be that, right? I think you do wrong, and that's something that I'm learning the hard way now. You do wrong, and this was proven in the psychology book by Charles Morris. If you guys want to look it up, if you don't believe me, but in the part of motivation and emotion, after he talks about hunger and the digestive system and the stomach and sex and all this stuff, he gets into achievement motivation. And no, sorry, prior to achievement motivation, they start to list different, not different, but other reasons for motivation, excuse me, such as interest, curiosity, exploration. And they also talk about um, aggression, right? And how some people are motivated to be violent or to be aggressive. And this part specifically of, um, yeah, which I think, I'm trying to remember if that's where I was going, but I think it was, yeah, because that's a little bit different than the expectation of difficulty, but it's not, because it's connected. So what they found out, they did an experiment where they, which is in the book, it's in the textbook, but basically what they did is they grabbed two groups of people. They told both of them were going to be trying to get people to donate money to a cause, and the people that they were both groups were going to call were, I think, like paid actors by the experimenters, where they were told to say no to these people that were going to try to sell, or that were trying to get them to donate to a charitable cause or things like that. Um, but they told one group that anybody could do sales, that anybody can get people to donate, and that it was super easy, right? Again, so they're telling them to expect it to be easy. While I think the other group, they either told them that it was going to be very difficult, or they told them nothing, right? And what they ended up finding out with this experiment is that the people that were told that it would be easy, as soon as the other people that would answer the phone and say, no, I'm not donating, they would get frustrated. They would hang up, slam the phone. And that's where frustration, that's where the term of frustration comes in, or the idea of frustration. So frustration as a response to anger beyond the normal evolutionary need of protection and its function and defense and all these things would be used as a way of not achieving that which you thought was easy, so to say, right?